The sun hung low over Crimson Ridge, casting long shadows across the dusty main street. The town was a rough-hewn collection of wooden buildings, their paint peeling under the relentless assault of wind and weather. Saloons, general stores, and boarding houses lined the thoroughfare, their false fronts creating an illusion of permanence in a place where nothing lasted long. Marcus Steele sat at a corner table in the Silver Spur Saloon, nursing a whiskey that had long since grown warm. His weathered face bore the marks of a hard life, scars that told stories he preferred to keep buried, eyes that had seen too much darkness. At 42, he was a man who had learned that survival often meant keeping your head down and your business to yourself. The saloon doors burst open with a crash that silenced the room. Two riders strode in, their spurs jingling with each heavy step. Marcus recognized them immediately. Colt Brennan and his partner, Snake Eye Sullivan, enforcers for Madame Lucretia Hollis, the woman who ran the Paradise House on the edge of town. They were men who took pleasure in their work, and their work was cruelty. "We're looking for a girl," Colt announced, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Young thing, dark hair, probably scared out of her mind. "Anyone seen her?" The patrons of the Silver Spur suddenly found their drinks fascinating. No one met the rider's eyes. No one spoke. In Crimson Ridge, you learned quickly that getting involved in Madame Hollis's business was a good way to end up in an unmarked grave. Marcus felt the familiar weight of indifference settle over him. This wasn't his fight. He'd spent years learning to ignore the injustices around him, to focus on his own survival. The world was full of people in trouble, and he couldn't save them all. But then he saw her. Through the saloon's grimy window, a flash of movement caught his eye. A young woman darted between buildings across the street, her dress torn and dirty, her face pale with terror. She couldn't have been more than 19 or 20, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and eyes wide with desperation. Isabella Hartwell pressed herself against the wall of the general store, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. She'd been running for hours, ever since she'd escaped from the Paradise House through a second-story window. Her hands were scraped raw from the climb down the rough wooden siding, and her feet ached in shoes never meant for running. She'd come to Crimson Ridge 3 months ago with such hope. The advertisement had promised respectable work as a seamstress, good wages, and safe lodging. Instead, she'd found herself trapped in Madame Hollis's establishment, her papers confiscated, her freedom stolen. The other girls had warned her not to try to escape. Madame Hollis always found runners, and the punishment was severe. But Isabella had seen what happened to girls who stayed too long at the Paradise House. She'd watched them lose their spark, their hope, their very souls. She'd rather die trying to escape than slowly wither away in that gilded prison. Now, hiding in the shadows, she could hear Colt and Snake Eye questioning people on the street. They were getting closer. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she looked desperately for somewhere to hide, somewhere to run. Inside the saloon, Marcus watched the scene unfold with growing unease. He told himself to look away, to finish his drink, and leave through the back door. This girl's problems weren't his concern. He'd learned long ago that heroes died young, and he'd survived this long by being smart, not noble. But something about the terror in her eyes reminded him of someone else. Someone from a past he'd tried to forget. His sister, Sarah, had been about that age when she disappeared into the darkness of a similar establishment in another frontier town. He'd been too young then, too powerless to help her. He'd spent years telling himself there was nothing he could have done. The memory burned like acid in his gut. "Damn it," Marcus muttered under his breath. He knew he was about to do something stupid, something that would likely get him killed. But he also knew he couldn't sit there and watch history repeat itself. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. Every eye in the saloon turned to him as he walked toward Colt and Snake Eye with deliberate steps. "You boys looking for someone?" Marcus asked, his voice casual despite the tension coiling in his muscles. Colt turned, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun at his hip. "Who's asking?" "Just a concerned citizen," Marcus replied. "Saw a girl matching your description heading east about 20 minutes ago. Looked like she was making for the stage depot." Snake Eye's eyes narrowed with suspicion. That so? And why would you be telling us this? Marcus shrugged. No reason for me to get involved in whatever trouble she's in, just passing along information. The two enforcers exchanged glances. The stage depot was on the far eastern edge of town, a good 15-minute ride. If the girl was really heading there, they'd need to move fast. Much obliged, Colt said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. The two men turned and strode out of the saloon, their spurs jingling as they headed for their horses. Marcus waited until they'd ridden off before moving. He slipped out the back door of the saloon and made his way quickly through the alleys toward where he'd seen the girl hiding. She was still there, pressed against the wall, the teeth trembling like a frightened rabbit. "Easy," Marcus said softly as he approached. "I'm not going to hurt you." Isabella's eyes went wide with fear. She looked ready to bolt. "Those two riders are heading east," Marcus continued. "I sent them on a wild goose chase, but they'll figure out I lied soon enough. You need to get out of town, and you need to do it now." "Why are you helping me?" Isabella asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus didn't have a good answer for that. "Because someone should have helped my sister when she needed it," he finally said. "Come on. I've got a horse at the livery. We need to move." They made their way through the back streets of Crimson Ridge, staying in the shadows, avoiding the main thoroughfare. Marcus's mind raced, calculating their options. The stage depot was out. Colt and Snake Eye would be watching it once they realized they'd been deceived. The train didn't come through for another 3 days. That left only one option. They'd have to ride out into the wilderness and hope they could stay ahead of pursuit. At the livery, Marcus quickly saddled his horse, a sturdy roan mare named Copper. Isabella watched nervously, jumping at every sound. "Can you ride?" Marcus asked. "Not well," Isabella admitted. "You'll have to learn fast. Climb up behind me and hold on tight." As Isabella settled behind him on the horse, Marcus felt the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. He was throwing away the quiet, anonymous life he'd built in Crimson Ridge. Madame Hollis had connections throughout the territory, and she didn't forgive those who interfered with her business. By helping this girl, he was painting a target on his own back. But as they rode out of town, heading north toward the mountains, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose. Maybe redemption was possible after all. Maybe it wasn't too late to be the man he should have been all those years ago when Sarah needed him. Behind them, the sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the promise of freedom, if they could survive long enough to claim it. The journey through the wilderness tested them both. They rode through the night, pushing Copper as hard as they dared. Isabella clung to Marcus's back, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist, her face pressed against his shoulder. She didn't complain, didn't ask to stop, even though he could feel her trembling with exhaustion. By dawn, they'd put considerable distance between themselves and Crimson Ridge. Marcus finally allowed them to stop near a small creek, where Copper could drink and rest. Isabella slid off the horse and immediately collapsed onto the grass, her body finally giving in to the strain. "We can rest here for a few hours," Marcus said, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. "But we'll need to keep moving. They'll be tracking us." Isabella nodded weakly. "Where are we going?" "There's a settlement called Haven's Rest about 3 days' ride north. It's run by a preacher and his wife, good people who help folks in trouble. You'll be safe there." "And you?" Isabella asked, looking up at him with those dark, haunted eyes. Marcus hadn't thought that far ahead. "I'll figure something out." As the sun climbed higher, they rested in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Isabella told him her story, how she'd answered the advertisement, how she'd been tricked and trapped, how she'd finally found the courage to escape. Marcus listened, his jaw tightening with anger at the injustice of it all. "You're brave," he told her when she finished. "Braver than most." "I don't feel brave," Isabella said softly. "I feel terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Marcus replied. "It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. You did that. You chose freedom over safety, even knowing the risks." They continued their journey, pushing north through rugged terrain. On the second day they spotted riders in the distance, 3 of them, moving with purpose. Marcus's heart sank. Madame Hollis had sent more than just Colt and Snake Eye. They rode harder, but Copper was tiring. The pursuers were gaining ground. By nightfall, Marcus knew they couldn't outrun them much longer. "There's a canyon up ahead," he told Isabella. "Narrow entrance, easy to defend. We'll make our stand there." "Stand?" Isabella's voice shook. "You mean fight?" "I mean survive," Marcus corrected. "Whatever it takes." They reached the canyon just as the last light faded from the sky. Marcus positioned them at the narrow entrance, his rifle ready. The three riders appeared shortly after, their silhouettes dark against the twilight sky. "Marcus Steele," one of them called out. "Madame Hollis wants the girl back. Hand her over, and you can walk away from this." "Not happening," Marcus called back. "Then you're a dead man." The standoff lasted through the night. The riders tried to rush the canyon entrance twice, but Marcus's rifle fire drove them back. He was a good shot, and the narrow passage gave him the advantage. But he knew he couldn't hold them off forever. Eventually, his ammunition would run out, or they'd find another way in. As dawn broke, something unexpected happened. More riders appeared on the horizon, but these weren't Madame Hollis's men. They were lawmen, led by a federal marshal who'd been investigating the Paradise House for months. The confrontation ended quickly after that. Madame Hollis's enforcers were arrested, and Isabella was finally, truly free. The marshal explained that several other girls had come forward with testimony against Madame Hollis, and Isabella's escape had been the catalyst that brought everything into the light. Marcus and Isabella reached Haven's Rest 3 days later. The preacher and his wife welcomed Isabella with open arms, promising her safety, honest work, and a chance to rebuild her life. As Marcus prepared to leave, Isabella caught his hand. "Thank you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You saved my life." "You saved your own life," Marcus replied. "I just helped you along the way." "What will you do now?" she asked. Marcus looked out at the horizon, at the vast expanse of possibilities stretching before him. For years, he'd been running from his past, from his guilt, from his failure to save Sarah. But helping Isabella had shown him something important. Redemption wasn't about changing the past. It was about choosing differently in the present. "I think," he said slowly, "I'll stop running. Maybe start helping other people who need it. There are a lot of Isabellas out there, and not enough people willing to stand up for them." Isabella smiled through her tears. "Then you're a hero after all." Marcus shook his head. "No, just a man trying to do better." As he rode away from Haven's Rest, Marcus felt lighter than he had in years. The weight of his past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer crushed him. He'd made a choice, to be the person who intervened, who stood up, who refused to look away from injustice. In the untamed West, where survival often meant selfishness, Marcus Steele had rediscovered something precious, his humanity. And in doing so, he'd found his purpose. The story of Marcus and Isabella spread through the territory, inspiring others to stand against the darkness. Madame Hollis's empire crumbled, and dozens of young women found their freedom. It all started with one man's decision to do the right thing, even when it was dangerous, even when it was easier to look away. Sometimes the price of freedom is courage, and sometimes one act of bravery can change everything. Will you choose courage when it matters most? Will you stand up for those who cannot stand for themselves? The world needs more people willing to pay the price of freedom, to risk comfort and safety for the sake of justice. What will your choice be?